Please welcome Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Dancers.
He started out as a shy, computer-obsessed teenager and ended up the richest man in the world.
Lifestyles of the rich and famous. No, that's never been Bill Gates. You get the sense that the money is almost an annoyance to him.
William Henry Gates III, most people just call him Bill Gates, has built an empire by thinking way outside the box.
I have no doubt that 100 years from now, he will be talked about in the same way that Rockefeller and Carnegie and Ford are talked about, as people who transformed an era.
Now, after leading the digital revolution and facing several government antitrust battles, Bill Gates is a different man than he was just a few years ago. He's a devoted father and an avid golfer who just happens to have a portfolio worth $50 billion. He could rest on his laurels, but that's not the Bill Gates style.
What makes Gates so competitive is that he finds it fun. He finds this like a thrilling game, like the games he used to play as a kid.
He's loved and respected, hated and reviled. But one thing neither detractors nor supporters can deny is the lasting impact Bill Gates has had on our time. The values that shaped Bill Gates as one of the business titans of the 20th century go back to his roots in the great Northwest. Bill's great-grandfather, J.W. Maxwell, founded the first national bank in Seattle. The Maxwells enjoyed their privileges and social position, but were never ostentatious about their wealth. Their son, Willard, also a banker, and his wife, Adele, who had a passion for playing cards, were among Seattle's top civic leaders. Their only child, Mary, was a lively, intelligent girl who made a name for herself as a student leader at the University of Washington. Athletic and outgoing, Mary Maxwell was sometimes referred to as Giggles. Her drive and energy struck everyone who came in contact with her.
There tends to be a handful that is right at the core of the action. Mary was at the core of the action. Mary was unaffected, straightforward, charming, but immensely determined.
It was at the university that Mary Maxwell met and fell in love with a quiet, scholarly young man, Bill Gates Jr., who would go on to become one of Seattle's most prominent attorneys. When Bill and Mary wed in 1951, she decided to give up a career as a teacher to raise a family and devote time to charitable work. The first of the Gates' 3 children, Christy, was born in 1953. She was followed by a brother, Bill Gates III, born on October 28, 1955. He was given the nickname Trey.
That derives from the fact that he was William H. Gates III, and the card players in the family think of anything with a 3 as being a Trey, so he became Trey.
His mother had an extremely close relationship with Bill from the start. She even took him with her when she volunteered as a lecturer in Seattle schools. It wasn't long before her precocious son would read the World Book Encyclopedia from A to Z.
We'd lose him sometime for hours at a time, and when I would ask, "What are you doing?" he'd say, "I'm thinking, Mother."
The Gates family prized competition, and young Bill loved testing his mettle in outdoor activities and indoor games. Among his favorite board games were Risk, in which the object is world domination, and the perennially popular Monopoly, where, with a bit of luck, anyone can become a tycoon.
He was competitive in cards with his sister, races to see who could do jigsaw puzzles faster, ski racing, sailing, whatever. He wanted to do it well and as good as the other folks that he was with.
Every summer, the Gates went off to their place on the Hood Canal called Cheerio. It was here that Bill, his younger sister Libby, and the rest of the family joined friends in staging their own Olympic Games.
If you stayed overnight and had a couple of days with them, you would come away exhausted from games and activity. It was a very lively scene. It was definitely competitive, there's no question about it, and the children were all part of that. There was never a dull moment.
The
first World's Fair in the United States in 22 years.
When the Seattle World's Fair opened in 1962, the Gates family rushed to see the wonders predicted for the 21st century, including computer technology.
Imagine, if you can, an electronic brain.
Bill often returned to visit the high-tech exhibits. It was already clear that he had a natural talent for math and science. But he was also becoming something of a loner, showing signs of preteen rebelliousness that was putting him at odds with his mother.
Mary and I grew up in very orderly families where parents were controlling personalities, and we carried that forward. And that particular mode wasn't exactly consistent with Bill or Trey, who somewhere around about 11 or 12 began to be very independent emotionally. He was quite willing to make up his own mind about what he wanted to do and not do, and that was really tough for us, particularly for Mary.
He was kind of lost. I mean, he was ill at ease in school, wasn't sure exactly how he wanted to spend his time. Obviously a very smart, brilliant kid, but kind of lacking direction. And he went through some counseling at that time. He went through a change in his school.
Although they believed in public education, Bill's parents felt he would find more direction and discipline at Lakeside, Seattle's best private prep school. He began to blossom at Lakeside.
He was an excellent math student. He was excellent across the board. I mean, he was a superb drama student and interested in reading all different kinds of books and so forth. So he wasn't just totally math science oriented. He had a wide breadth of interests.
When Bill started high school in 1969, the U.S. space program was at its peak. Apollo 11 took men to the moon that July.
The Eagle has landed.
But the computers that made it possible were still electronic giants that cost millions of dollars and required an army of people to run. Most schools at that time could never consider buying a big computer. But Lakeside had made an extraordinary deal that would be fateful for Bill Gates. A Seattle company offered the use of its computer through a teletype link to the school. Young Gates was entranced by the possibilities of this primitive machine and started spending every free moment in the computer room.
The story has often been told, and it's completely true, that he would get up at night and leave and go over to work on the computer and come back, and we wouldn't know that he'd been gone.
Bill Gates shared this addiction with upperclassman Paul Allen, who could not have been more different from Gates. He was not only 2 years older, but substantially larger. Where Allen was quiet and contemplative by nature, Bill could be shrill and confrontational. Nevertheless, this odd couple was destined to make history together. While attending Seattle's prestigious Lakeside Prep School, Bill Gates met Paul Allen, an upperclassman who shared his obsession with computers.
They bonded by writing software code together, and somewhat competitive, Paul Allen and Bill Gates. They every now and then would have fights. At one point, Paul Allen kicked Bill Gates, who was a little bit younger, off of the little group they had as writing software, but then he realized that he needed Gates back. He couldn't do it without him, and Gates said, well, I'm happy to come back, but this time I'm going to be in charge.
By 1970, when Bill was just 15, he and Paul Allen went into business together. The two boys netted $20,000 with TrafoData, a computerized program they created to measure traffic flow in the Seattle area. Although Bill had the luxury of family money, he was determined from the start to make his own fortune.
The father of one of Bill's boyhood friends said Bill always had a nose for the dollar. Even as a kid, he knew the value of a contract, and even had a contract to use his older sister's baseball mitt that was signed in a legal document.
In the summer of 1972, at the age of 17, Bill went to Washington, D.C. to work as a Senate page. This exposure to politics and government would come in handy later on. Back home that fall, he took a leave of absence from school when he and Paul Allen got their first real jobs with a computer company. They began talking about starting their own company, but the Gates insisted that their son finish high school and attend college.
His mother used to worry that he was socially awkward. Well, maybe he was, but he had other things on his mind, and he was not rude, he was not abrupt. He was marching to a different drummer. He's a genius, and he has a different agenda.
Bill graduated from Lakeside in 1973, and his parents took great pride in his acceptance at Harvard University. So he left Seattle and headed east to Cambridge, Massachusetts. As a freshman at Harvard, he thought briefly about preparing for a career in law, but no course of study ignited his imagination like his work with the computer.
Bill was somebody who was always very determined to do what he was interested in doing. The things that he was less interested in, which often included his academic classes, he tended simply to coast and get by on talent. I remember there was a course in Introduction to Greek Literature where he'd really done, as best as I could tell, none of the work during the year. Stayed up all night the night before the exam, slept through part of the exam, and still got a B.
It was not surprising that Gates fell asleep in an exam. Between classes and time spent at the Harvard Computer Center, he seemed to be on the go 24 hours a day.
And he was always very focused on whatever it was that he was doing. He could come into his room, not get undressed, just kind of lie down on his bed, which of course would be not made because he had never had time for that, and just fall asleep. Door open, fully clothed, lie down, sleep, and then when he's refreshed, boom, back up at it and whatever the next thing was.
Bill paused long enough to make some lasting friendships at Harvard, but his social life was not a priority. He dated only occasionally, with varying degrees of success.
I interviewed several women who had dated Bill just briefly, and one told me the very first question Bill asked her was, "What did you score on your SAT test?" You know, this is not exactly, you know, what a young woman wants to hear. For Bill Gates, though, he had scored a perfect 800 on his math portion of the SAT, and this was a matter of pride with him, and he wanted to make sure whoever he was dating, you know, had scored a pretty high grade.
Bill did shine in math, but true to form, when he found out that he was not the #1 math student at Harvard, he decided against becoming a mathematician. While he kept his academic options open, he picked up some new skills outside of class.
Spent a great deal of time playing pinball, video games, and especially poker, which was something that we all did a lot of back in college.
But it was Paul Allen, Bill's former schoolmate and business partner, who delivered Gates' biggest stroke of luck. Allen had moved to Boston from Seattle for a job. In December of 1974, he picked up a magazine in Harvard Square. The cover of Popular Electronics announced the arrival of the world's first mini-computer kit, the Altair 8800. He rushed to show it to Bill. Gates and Allen knew instantly that the day of the personal computer had arrived.
They saw that this was going to be an incredible force, an incredible dynamic for the society, and recognized the moment.
The Altair was made by a small company in Albuquerque, New Mexico, not far from the former atomic testing grounds at Alamogordo. Ed Roberts, who ran the company, was looking for someone to create software to run on his unique little computer. Gates and Allen convinced him that they were the ones who could do it, and worked day and night at the Harvard Computer Center for 2 months. In February of 1975, Paul Allen went to Albuquerque to test the program he and Gates had completed. When he loaded the Altair with what Bill Gates called the coolest code I ever wrote, it worked. The importance of that moment would change Bill Gates and the software industry forever. In the summer of 1975, 19-year-old Bill Gates and his partner Paul Allen formed Microsoft. Their ongoing work with Ed Roberts' Altair computer company became so consuming that Bill dropped out of Harvard just before his senior year and moved to Albuquerque. Mary Gates was deeply disappointed by her son's decision.
We told him that we'd put some money aside for him to attend school, and if he didn't finish in a few years, we'd have to make some other use of those funds. And by that time, he allowed us out. That would be okay. He'd probably be able to afford to go back if and when the time came.
Bill was certain that he had made the right decision, but making it in software wouldn't be so easy. The personal computer scene at that time was populated by users who were eager to share new information and software without paying for it. It was a practice that put Bill at odds with his peers.
You know, it was a bunch of high school kids and college kids who were doing something very non-mainstream. And Bill was very unpopular because he said, hey guys, don't steal this stuff. We made it and we own it. And that was, yeah, he was one of the business guys in what was a lot of geek hackers.
In fact, Gates wrote an open letter to computer hobbyists, chastising them about making copies of Microsoft's program. He stated, as the majority of hobbyists must be aware, most of you steal your software. Hardware must be paid for, but software is something to share. Who cares if the people who worked on it get paid? Is this fair? But those who have been reported to us may lose in the end.
He was looked at as kind of a renegade, and it was different, you know, a different ethic than prevailed at that time. But I'm not sure that the software industry would have evolved in anywhere near the way it has without somebody standing up and saying that that was necessary.
Bill had also been battling with Ed Roberts, who considered him spoiled and obnoxious. The two disagreed about almost everything, and Roberts was a formidable adversary.
Ed Roberts was a massive man, something like 6'6", weighed 300 pounds. Here Bill Gates was. I mean, he formed Microsoft at age 19, and he looked like he was 13 years old. He was standing up to this bear of a man, going face-to-face with him and screaming and shouting matches.
A final confrontation came in May of 1977, when Roberts sold his business, and Gates had to sue to keep the software he and Paul Allen created for the company. Gates won.
We take a hard line on software.
Microsoft expanded into new software languages, and Gates and Allen started to sell their products to other computer companies. At the end of 1978, with sales approaching the 1 million mark, they moved Microsoft from Albuquerque to Seattle. Bill was glad to be back and went into high gear to promote his hometown company.
We always design with the future in mind. Our research people are always tracking the latest in hardware and software technology.
It was Bill Gates who was actually the real marketing genius behind Microsoft. Early on, he was the one who was actually going out on the road and trying to sell this company and its software. And oftentimes, he would take his mother with him on these trips.
Bill's highly respected and well-connected mother would come to play a pivotal role in his early career.
Mary served on a number of corporate boards as well as the University of Washington. She was on the National Board of United Way. Also on the National Board of United Way was the CEO of IBM, which is how her son met the CEO of IBM, through her.
What would your ideal home computer be like?
By November of 1980, IBM was banging on the door of the fledgling Microsoft.
Without an overpowering price.
The largest maker of computers in the world now wanted to talk to Gates and Allen about coming up with an operating system for their new line of personal computers. From their first meeting, IBM misjudged who they were dealing with.
He looked like a sub-teen, you know. He was skinny, had a real mop of hair, you know, kind of casual, and basically people didn't take him seriously as a business person.
But the IBM brass soon discovered Gates was no amateur. He quickly convinced them that Microsoft could deliver their new software. First, he purchased an existing operating system, which he then adapted for the IBM personal computers, calling it MS-DOS.
Bill Gates, as he's often done, as a shrewd businessman, knew where to get an operating system. He just went down the road a few miles and bought it for $50,000. But then the real brilliance was that when they developed that operating system for IBM, IBM wanted to buy the source code, which would have given them the disk operating system, or what became known as DOS. And instead, Microsoft refused to actually sign the rights over to DOS.
By not owning the rights to the operating system, IBM would now have to pay Microsoft a licensing fee for every copy of DOS installed on its computers.
It can help a manager excel.
IBM was also about to lose its tremendous edge in computer sales.
The IBM personal computer.
As other companies introduced personal computers that were cheaper than IBM's, Microsoft was able to sell the same operating system to all of them.
There were all kinds of computers that were being conceived at that point in time. And it struck me that I don't know who will win in the hardware business, but Microsoft has a very good chance to win in the software. business.
Between 1978 and 1981, Microsoft's growth was staggering. The staff was enlarged from 13 employees to 128. Revenues mushroomed from $4 to $16 million. By 1983, 30% of all the personal computers in the world were running Microsoft software. Still, Bill Gates never took his eye off the bottom line.
He never flew first class unless it was absolutely necessary. You would often find him sitting in coach, in fact with a blanket over his head so he could get some sleep. So his parents taught him well early on the value of money and hard work, and translated later into his life with not only how he ran his personal life, but how he ran Microsoft.
My name is Bill Gates. I'm chairman of Microsoft.
The early 1980s was an exciting time for an industry run mostly by people under 30. Microsoft began working on software for innovative companies like Apple and its guru, Steve Jobs. Their Macintosh computer and software were considered by many to be the most ingenious in the industry and the way of the future.
To create a new standard, it takes something that's really new and really captures people's imagination. And the Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
But it wouldn't be long before Microsoft and Apple would be locked in a bitter struggle over the rights to the next generation of software. Bill Gates was also about to receive news that would rock Microsoft to its very foundation. By 1983, the future could not have looked more promising for 28-year-old Bill Gates and Microsoft. The personal computer business was booming, and there was an ever-increasing hunger for software. Bill Gates and Paul Allen were emerging as the crown princes of the personal computer age. But in the midst of the breathtaking rise of their company, they were stunned by some terrible news. Paul Allen, Bill's friend and partner since high school, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, a form of cancer.
It did give Bill kind of a perspective that he didn't have before. You know, he'd always been very, very hard driving, very demanding, and this may have helped him understand a little bit better in terms of what other people go through.
Allen's disease went into remission 1 year later, but he would never again take full part in the day-to-day business of Microsoft. For two men in their early 30s who created a company of global significance and made millions, it was the end of an era.
I think history's going to show that their partnership really was an incredible dynamic. I often compare it to the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney. The songs they wrote together are the ones that pretty much we remember and get played over and over again. They were great songwriters individually. I mean, we still hear their songs that they wrote on their own. But somehow together they were even greater than the sum of their parts. And Paul and Bill were like that.
By 1984, Bill Gates had become the singular face of Microsoft. In April of that year, he was heralded by Time magazine as the quintessential representative of a new breed of businessman. One who understood both nuts and bolts technology and corporate strategy.
When you work with Bill, you can see that in almost any meeting you're in or anything you're discussing, Bill instantly puts together a profile of all of the cases. What about this? 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 He almost builds this checklist of everything that can possibly happen in his head in a very structured way, and then he runs through it.
Protect mode file system, the super advanced file system.
Microsoft was often referred to as a math camp, where Gates' demanding management style kept the creative process churning and sometimes set off heated confrontations.
The early Gates would challenge just about anything. He'd call things the stupidest idea you'd ever heard. And part of it was to test, to see, well, okay, if you disagree, you've got to convince me that it's not the stupidest idea in the world.
A constant challenging of ideas was required to stay on top in an ever-changing industry. Gates surrounded himself with a team that shared his relentless work ethic.
Certainly when we are working to release a software product, we are sleepless in Seattle. There's a story about Bill from Miriam Lubau, his assistant. She was new to the company. She came in one morning and she didn't know if she should call police because there was this guy sleeping under a desk. But it turned out to be Bill.
The effort was paying off. Microsoft posted more than $140 million in sales in 1985. In 1986, Gates introduced Microsoft Windows. it would become the company's signature program. Critics quickly noted that in its use of a mouse and icons, it bore more than a passing resemblance to the Apple Macintosh operating system, considered to be the most user-friendly.
If you know how to point, you already know how to use it. Macintosh, the computer for the rest of us.
Apple had given Gates full access to their technology while he was working on new software for the Macintosh computer. Gates advised Apple early on that they should license their software. But Apple was more interested in selling computers than software. They ignored the suggestion. Once again, Gates took advantage of an opening and ran with it.
In this industry, we compete and we collaborate at the same time. Bill once had a conversation with me, says, you know, I'm a competitor, so even though I'm a friend, don't tell me information that you don't want me to use against you, because I'm going to compete with you, and if you tell me something that's useful in competing, I'm going to use that information.
Apple decided that Gates was not going to take a bite out of their business and threatened to sue over Windows. Gates, in turn, said he would withhold Microsoft software Apple desperately needed for its computers. In the end, Microsoft overpowered Apple in the courts.
Eventually, Microsoft prevailed by showing that even though there were similarities in the way that the two computers operated, each individual function of Windows was markedly different from each individual function of the Macintosh.
Even though the first version of Windows was far from perfect, it gave Microsoft a new financial and creative base. In 1986, Bill Gates took his company public. He held 45% of the stock, which made him a billionaire at the age of 31. Still, Gates never felt secure about the status of his company.
He doesn't want to fail. And when you have that kind of a fear, when you're always looking in your rearview mirror to see who might be, you know, creeping up to do in Microsoft on a given day, it just consumes him, and it makes him certainly the most competitive human being in the personal computer industry. He's driven. It's white-hot intensity.
Gates was also gaining a reputation for being ruthless, and some powerful forces began to line up against him. Now that PCs had taken off, IBM chose to make a big push with its own operating system to replace DOS, which it licensed from Microsoft. It was called OS/2.
We were concerned whether we could weather the storm, so to speak, especially given the fact that this was a big storm. IBM, a very powerful company, a lot of software people, a lot of cash, a lot of resolve to potentially put Microsoft out of the operating system business.
Ironically, Microsoft played a role in developing OS/2. But Bill Gates was not about to abandon his own software. He decided to stake his company's future and his own reputation on the Windows software his team continued to upgrade, even if it meant losing IBM as his biggest customer. On May 22, 1990, Microsoft launched Windows 3.0. This new and improved version swiftly became a bestseller. Ultimately, OS/2 failed in the marketplace, leaving Microsoft with a virtual monopoly on operating systems for PCs. Now the Federal Trade Commission began looking at claims that Gates was using this dominance in operating systems to cut off competition by cutting prices on Microsoft products. It seemed Microsoft's mild-mannered chairman was gaining a seek and destroy image.
Bill Gates is not a brutal guy. He just needs to win. And he's willing to win, you know, gracefully or non-gracefully. It doesn't matter. A win is still a win.
Predatory pricing was not the only charge leveled at Microsoft. In 1993, the Justice Department began a new investigation. Gates would have to face one of his most formidable opponents, the United States government. In 1993, Bill Gates and Microsoft were again under investigation by the U.S. Justice Department. They examined complaints that Microsoft was charging computer makers a licensing fee based on the number of computers they sold, including those computers not running Microsoft software.
They made computer manufacturers pay for the Microsoft software, whether it was installed on their computer or not. And as a result of that, they prevented competitors from entering the market.
The Justice Department has charged Microsoft, the world's largest software company, with using unfair marketing and contracting practices.
In July of 1994, Microsoft agreed to stop charging the fees in question, and the Justice Department dropped the case. Gates would never admit that Microsoft had a monopoly, and maintained he was simply providing better software at lower prices.
I mean, we're not like an alligator. We don't go around and eat things. We come out with these little boxes, these nice little software packages, and you stick them in your computer, and you either have fun using it, and it helps you get things done, or not.
But it wasn't that simple for investors. The government probes and the fights with IBM and Apple caused the value of Microsoft's stock to drop. There was now more pressure than ever to turn out the next version of Windows. Gates found some inventive ways to release the tension. He appeared in commercials for his company with Microsoft Top Gun Steve Ballmer.
The next frontier.
He sometimes made dramatic entrances to tout his company at software conventions, once arriving as Star Trek's Mr. Spock. Gates also instituted the microgames. This hodgepodge competition among the Microsofties is very reminiscent of the games he played as a child at the Hood Canal.
It was like summer camp for adults. We'd all go to his house, and he would spend months figuring out what the various games would be, and he would be sort of the master of ceremonies. He'd form us into teams, very carefully figuring out the dynamics of the teams and how we might all interact. And then we would have to do these like summer camp games. And I met Melinda first at one of those micro games.
Melinda was 28-year-old Melinda French, a Duke graduate with an MBA. She had been working as an executive at Microsoft for several years. It was becoming increasingly clear to Bill's family and friends that she was the woman that 37-year-old Gates had decided to spend his life with.
He dated Melinda for quite a while before they got married, and so I saw them together over the years, and they always looked like they had a very special thing going, you know, a level of intimacy and a level of intellectual connection that just caused sparks.
She's a really wonderful person, a perfect match for him. Very, very bright, very organized, very supportive, very interested in family and good family life.
Bill and Melinda were married in Hawaii on January 1st, 1994. The night before the ceremony, Bill had arranged for a special serenade for Melinda.
He had Willie Nelson play the night before his wedding, and it was a total surprise. Bill got up and he said, you know, I really love Melinda, and I really want to sing her some songs tonight, and I don't sing that well, and so I asked a friend of mine to come and do a little singing for us, and so it was a big surprise.
In Melinda, Bill found a partner who gave him the kind of personal happiness he'd been looking for, and who also understood the professional demands of his business. But only months after his marriage, the joy that Bill shared with his family would turn to heartbreak. His mother, Mary, who had been his most devoted ally, was diagnosed with breast cancer. She died in the early morning of June 10, 1994. Bill rushed home to be at his mother's side.
When he came to the house that night, he'd been stopped by the police on the way because he was speeding. And of course, the policeman recognized him. Wasn't the first time he ever got stopped for speeding, by the way. And they looked at him and they said, what's going on? Because he said, you know, I was sitting there and the tears were just running down my face. And the policeman said, well, he said to the policeman, I'm sorry, he said, my mother just died. And the policeman said, well, you go ahead, you go on home, but please slow down a little bit if you don't mind. So he was very deeply affected by his mother's death, as we all were, of course.
In the years that followed, Bill would begin to pick up where his mother left off in creating a philanthropic foundation to serve major projects in health and education. But all of his wealth and power would not shield him from the crises he and Microsoft would face on the road ahead. By 1995, 39-year-old Bill Gates had settled into a new life as a married man. With his wife, Melinda, he took time off to explore the world from Africa to China. It seemed that Bill Gates now truly had it all.
This is a man so successful, his chauffeur is Ross Perot, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Dancers.
1995 was also a banner year for Microsoft. Windows 95 was introduced to great fanfare. Tonight Show host Jay Leno kicked off the ballyhoo for the new software.
Windows 95 is so easy, even a talk show host can figure it out.
Clearly, Gates was still Microsoft's best salesman. But from now on, it wouldn't be all business for the boss. On April 26, 1996, Bill and Melinda welcomed their first child, a daughter, Jennifer.
He just loved that little girl. It's just so marvelous to see. It's very gratifying to a father to see his own son have the same feeling about children that I did about him and his sisters. So it's really gratifying.
A year after his daughter's birth, Bill moved his family into a $54 million dream house. Along with family and guest quarters, there is a library housing the Leonardo da Vinci notebook, for which Gates paid more than $30 million. Even though the house serves many business functions, for the Gates family, it's just home.
It's a remarkably family-friendly home, given what it is. I remember the first time going there after it was fully finished, walking through it and seeing, you know, little Tykes cars in various places and things like that. I mean, this is not an antiseptic home that you feel afraid to touch anything or sit anywhere.
As Bill Gates' personal life grew more fulfilling, his professional life grew more frustrating. By 1997, he found he was way behind in the exploding internet market. A company called Netscape was dominating sales of internet browsers, the software needed to access websites. Gates set out to close the gap by including Explorer, his browser, with every copy of Microsoft Windows. Many saw it as dirty pool, a move to eliminate his chief rival.
If Microsoft chooses to disadvantage Netscape or any other competitor, then the consumer doesn't get a fair choice. When the consumer doesn't get a fair choice, the market can't work effectively.
In 1998, Gates was called to the Senate, where he was once a page, and charged with running an illegal monopoly.
I hope that my testimony helps the court to resolve the issues in this case. That would be best for consumers and the industry, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
President Bill Clinton's Justice Department, along with 19 states, filed an antitrust suit against Microsoft. It was the largest suit of its kind in the history of the computer industry.
Microsoft has the power today to exercise predatory and exclusionary control over the very means by which we access this internet. It's a lot like General Motors having the ability to dictate what type of gasoline you put in your car, or what interstate you can drive on, or even how you get on the interstate.
In 2000, a federal judge ruled that the company would have to be split in two. After more than 2 decades of unstoppable success, this was a huge blow to Bill Gates.
The antitrust trial affected Bill Gates very deeply. He was very sensitive to the accusations that he was petulant, that he was arrogant, that he didn't answer all the questions fairly, that he was trying to be obstructive with prosecutors.
Rural town of about 4.
The antitrust suit lasted 4 years and cost Microsoft millions of dollars in legal fees. Ultimately, in 2002, the Justice Department, under President George Bush, offered Microsoft a favorable settlement. It would be an infuriating moment for Microsoft's detractors and a triumphant moment for Bill Gates and company. In the midst of the antitrust suit, Bill Gates surprised many when he stepped down as Microsoft's CEO, dubbing himself chairman and chief software architect. The CEO job went to his old Harvard pal, Steve Ballmer.
They're old friends, and Gates really wanted to just be the ideas man. He really just wanted to take a step back, and that's what he did, and it's working very well now. So it was difficult for him to let go of his baby, but he got used to it.
For the last decade, Bill Gates has been on a mission to share his wealth. In 2000, he formed the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year on computers, vaccines, and medicines for those who need them most.
the rich world and the poor world are so separated, the awareness of the crisis in AIDS and the very effective interventions that can take place is very, very low. The time is really now to change these things.
He has publicly stated that he will not be leaving his vast fortune to his children.
Well, what Bill Gates has said is that he's going to give away, before the end of his life, 90% of his fortune.
Bill Gates has become a global icon. His second book, Business at the Speed of Thought, was published in 25 languages and is available in more than 60 countries. In 2004, Forbes magazine rated him as the richest person in the world for the 11th consecutive year. His net worth, estimated at about $50 billion, leaves him some time to play, but not too much.
The industry keeps changing. I mean, it's the perfect game because it never ends. You can't sit down and relax.
Through it all, William Henry Gates III has remained the competitor he always was. Looking to the future, this visionary is investing much of his energy on expanding the Microsoft market into global territories like the Middle East and China. Meanwhile, Gates and Microsoft have set their sights to improve their software to battle against computer viruses and spam. Gates himself is said to receive 4 million spam emails per day. Whether he'll be remembered as a robber baron, a philanthropist, or the guy who simply built a better mousetrap, no one can deny he changed the way the world works and plays.
When the biographers and historians write the history of the 20th century, Bill Gates is going to go down as the best businessman of our century, and Microsoft is one of the greatest companies of the 20th century. It's remarkable what this company has managed to do in so short a time. This is one of the great success stories of the 20th century.